name is Jeffrey Laird. I'm the events coordinator for the community organization Together Frankfort. And on behalf of Together Frankfort, we're pleased to welcome you all to the Frankfort Town Hall on flood mitigation. The term mitigation is defined as the act of reducing the severity, seriousness, or impact of something harmful, in this case, flooding. As terrible as last year's flooding was to our community, we are here tonight to focus on the future, to learn from our distinguished panel of community leaders and professionals about current mitigation projects and policies, as well as mitigation plans that will or could take place in the future. Our panel of community leaders, scientists, and experts have taken time from their busy schedules to come here tonight and talk to us about their own involvement with flood mitigation efforts and provide us with important information on this critical issue. Being the library, time is critically short tonight, so we would ask each panel member to introduce themselves and describe what they do, as opposed to me introducing them. Whatever time is left, when the last panel member speaks, will be open to take questions from the audience. At that time, just raise your hand and I will come around to you with the microphone. So let's get started. Mr. Mayor, you have the floor. No, you will just pass the mic.
All right, Lane Wilkerson, Frankfort Mayor.
Michael Muller, Franklin County Judge Executive. I appreciate everybody being here tonight.
Autumn Gotterwitz, Franklin County Planning Director.
Are we supposed to talk about what we do, or?
No, just pass
okay,
the mic.
all right. Andrea Dreyer, UK Kentucky Water Research Institute.
Case Davis, I'm the president of Beaver Creek Hydrology, and I'm also a member of the Kentucky River Authority Board.
Sean Hokinson, I'm the Water Resources Branch Manager for the Kentucky Division of Water.
Good evening, I'm Jenny Jo Bronner. I'm the State Hazard Mitigation Officer for the Commonwealth.
My name is Esther White. I am a project grants manager at the University of Kentucky for the Hazard Mitigation Grants Program, and I'm also executive director for the Kentucky Association of Mitigation Managers, several members of which are on the panel.
Good evening, I'm Brandon Brummett. I'm the outreach coordinator and also serve as a project manager for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Louisville District.
All right. Well, Frankfort Mayor Lane Wilkerson again. I want to thank Together Frankfort and your leadership for organizing this event and for all you do throughout the year, not just talking about flood mitigation, but all the important topics that Together Frankfort discusses and brings people together. And with flood mitigation, it is one of the more serious concerns, long-term concerns facing our community and the city of Frankfort. Our responsibility is to help reduce that risk and prepare for the realities that we cannot control. To that end, what we're doing locally now is we're working with our federal delegation to work on riverbank stabilization, particularly in the downtown areas and the public spaces that the city controls. And to that end, we have been, we've been partially successful in securing some funds in terms of, we passed one House of Congress, and we just need to get the additional, the Senate to approve the remaining amount. We have $5.8 million in the Homeland Security bill that will go toward the Frankfort Riverbank Stabilization Project, and these funds will be much needed to help us stabilize where we're having the erosion and riverbank loss, particularly in the downtown area on Riverview Park, where Blanton's Landing is. Those are the areas that we've identified so far. So we're hopeful that the funds will be included or in this final legislation. Recent events may have affected the likelihood of the passage of that bill, and it's unfortunate that it all gets tied up. You know, something so important to the city of Frankfort gets tied up into something larger, but we're advocating for it, and if it happens, it's going to be a big boost. It's going to allow us to have funds to build the foundation and make investments on the riverfront to make it more accessible, to allow the public to enjoy the waterfront more than we have been able to in the past, and possibly bring some amenities that the community has asked for on the riverfront. Building on that, the city is also, at our last commission meeting, we voted to hire world-renowned landscape design firm Sasaki to develop an updated riverfront master plan that will not only include the downtown area, but will take into account areas all the way out the Old Lawrenceburg Road to the east-west connector, all the way down to the Lock 4 Dam. And we're hopeful that this will give us an opportunity to create something that is so compelling and that we can get support from larger entities like the state government or our federal delegation in terms of earmarks. So we're working on projects that will allow the community to enjoy the riverfront more, but also make it, to the point of this meeting tonight, more flood resilience. And that's one of the reasons we chose Sasaki. They have expertise in designing parks and public spaces that flood, and they know that we have a wild river. They know how it floods, and we hopeful that they will help us design something to allow the community to enjoy the riverfront more. I'm just as excited as you are to learn from some of our esteemed guests here tonight, the ones who can talk about things that are more regional in nature, because although there are things we can do locally, we also understand that there are things that can be done regionally and upstream in the Kentucky River watershed, and those are things that, as mayor, as a city, that we can advocate for. But we're going to need help. We can't go it alone. We're going to need help from our regional and state partners to that end. I'll turn it over to our county judge.
Thank you, Mayor. Hope everybody's doing well tonight. The flood was probably the worst thing, and I'm not going to speak for the mayor, but I've been in office now, this is my 8th year. By far, it was the worst 3 weeks in office. Some of them. It was brutal, to watch this community go through what we went through. We're still working on buyouts. The county has agreed to do 36 buyouts. We had 40, a couple people dropped out. I think we have roughly 20 already approved, 16 just today. I didn't even tell you that, Autumn. Yeah, we got approval for the other 16. People ask about FEMA. One thing I learned today is FEMA has been defunded as of February 28th. They're funding ICE through FEMA. So we have FEMA that they can go to new disasters, but they can't help the people what we're going through now. So that's very uneasy, to say the least. But anyways, we are here to learn. I know we had a couple town halls right after the devastating storms. And this was talked about, why is the river flooding? Is it Dick's Dam? We've been through a little bit of everything. Everybody has theories, everybody has thoughts. I will say this is a very impressive panel. I'm looking forward to just sitting here listening myself and learning. Also want to acknowledge Squire Sherry Sebastian for being here tonight, because a lot of the areas affected in the county were in her district. Big Eddy, Travis Circle. People ask, what are you going to do with those areas once we demolish the homes? All we can really do is make it parkland, but that's okay. We're going to plant trees. We're going to stabilize those banks ourselves, and we're looking forward to that. So we're glad we can do that as a community. I don't want to say too much because Autumn next to me is an amazing planning with the county, and I know she has a lot more better, more intelligent things to say than me. So, but again, thank you for coming. This is going to be a great evening.
I just want to touch on a couple of different things. First of all, our office, the planning department, is the one that handles local floodplain permitting. So as folks are rebuilding and that sort of thing, you probably have talked to someone in our office, and I can answer some questions about that if those are something that come up tonight. I want to mention that we are part of the community rating system in our community, and that enables us to offer, enables FEMA to offer a discount to our community for flood insurance. Everyone is eligible for flood insurance regardless of whether or not you live in a floodplain or a flood-prone area. So that is something to consider, and we can provide resources on where to get quotes for that through the National Flood Insurance Program. We're also working on a code update for our full zoning code, but that does include things that will impact mitigation and impact flooding. So we're looking at our floodplain ordinances and also at developing riparian buffer ordinances. So basically really trying to ensure that we are protecting the banks and vegetation and wildlife and that sort of thing along our waterways, as well as ensuring that our future development, construction, goes above and beyond our current standards and the standards that we had previously, so that when these things happen, we're able to recover more quickly and not have the level of impact that we felt this last time. I can also touch on some of the buyout process and where we are on that if folks have questions on that, I think. But for now, I'll just go ahead and hand it off to the next person.
So as the Kentucky River Basin Coordinator through UK, I'm employed through a contract with the Kentucky River Authority. And so a good chunk of my work is on water quality and improving water quality. After the flooding, most of my focus has been on private landowners contacting me, asking me what to do about the erosion issues that they have on their properties. And so my role in all of that is to connect you to private landowners to the resources that are available, like NRCS funding or different types of funding for doing some sorts of, and people to help you, like the Forest Service will do. If you have forests on your property, they'll do some surveys and give you some suggestions. So a good chunk of what I've done for this area and flood relief, as well as Whitesburg area, which has gotten hit just as bad, if not worse, in a lot of cases, for a community that really didn't have the ability to recover very quickly, is talk to them about riparian planting. So I'm glad that it came up a couple times. It's really important. A lot of the reasons that there is erosion issues happening is because there's not a large enough, and riparian, by the way, means streamside vegetation planting, and it usually means trees. So the reason people a lot of times have those erosion issues is because they do not have enough trees on the edge of the creek or on the edge of the river. So my suggestion, my personal suggestion that I give out is for the main stem of the Kentucky River, it should be a 50-foot barrier of trees, if at all possible. And we'll take what we can get, okay? And then if it's your own personal property on one of these tributaries, it can be less than that and it's not as imperative, but it does need to be, according to science and also just my personal opinion, at least 20 to 30 feet on these tributaries. This is a very big river and it has a lot of power. And so the more trees you have, the more trees will hold on to each other through their roots, and you won't have as much trees falling in, you won't have as much erosion happening. So that's like my main role in what I've been doing with the flooding and sort of my advice for most people post-flooding. That will help you maintain your property lines when you really need them. Another thing is I am the co-chair of the Kentucky River Water Trail right now, and so I'm hearing about these properties that you all are gathering with your buyouts, and it would be really helpful if we could arrange, oh good, arrange some sort of access points, because we would like Frankfort area to be one of the first parts of that Kentucky River Water Trail to start. So that's not flooding related, but it sort of is, so, okay. Yeah, okay. I'm gonna pass it on to Case.
All right, so I'm a civil engineer. The company that I work for and own is Beaver Creek Hydrology, and we're headquartered in Lexington. And we're an ecosystem restoration firm. We do stream and wetland restoration. We do a lot of projects that offset impacts to waterways, where we purchase tracts of land and we restore them and create offset credits. And the way we do that is we take streams that are highly eroding, highly degraded, and restore them to reduce erosion and plant a whole lot of trees. We've restored over 200 miles of streams and all over the Kentucky and Tennessee. I'm also a member of the River Authority, so I have some expertise that I can bring to that endeavor. But when you look at flooding on the Kentucky River, it is a regional problem, right? I mean, all the water that floods Frankfort doesn't come from Frankfort, it comes from upstream. And so there are efforts underway, and there's federal dollars, and I think even the state legislature is looking at maybe an Office of Resiliency. And what we need to look at and think about, and the fact that you're in this room today, is that you realize that water is an issue. I feel like personally, like I started our company because I know there's a huge problem with degraded streams, and sediment is one of our #1 pollutants, and it's because of all the erosion and all the impacts and all the logging and all the coal mining and all the things, all roads, everything that we do as people to build our society has an impact to a waterway, and especially in Kentucky, we've got more streams than anywhere. So I could talk about this all day. It's about 7 minutes, but I just kind of want to give you all my thoughts on how this works and some of the work that we're doing. Just recently, we've done projects in Breathitt County and Lawrence County and Elliott County, and even down in Casey and Marion County and Bath County and Nicholas County. And these projects all help reduce flooding in their own ways, right? And slowing water down on the landscape is how we reduce flooding. And so in the past, it's been, we build a giant dam that holds a whole bunch of water back, and that helps control flooding upstream, right? Well, it's very difficult to build very large dams anymore. For one, they have a huge environmental impact. And two, they have a huge impact on communities and things like that. So what the trend and what we're moving towards, and the focus in the past 15, 20 years has been to use nature-based solutions for flood control, right? So that means restoring these riparian habitats, restoring wetlands, protecting our streams, so that water, and changing grazing practices. There was a huge announcement by the EPA recently for regenerative agriculture practices, because that helps soil absorb more water. And you think about when it rains, and that's, as an engineer, that's what we think about, is like every drop of water that falls on the land, the faster it runs off, the more flood you're going to have here in Frankfort. So the more we can slow that down and throughout the whole watershed, the better off we're going to be. And it's a huge deal, and it is a regional thing, and it's a national thing that we really need to look at. And in my opinion, our air and our water are our most important resources. Sure, you can make money cutting trees down and selling them, and you can make money digging the ground and getting coal out of the ground, and there's lots of different viewpoints on a lot of those things, but we have to have air and we have to have water. And the better we treat our air and water, the better off we're going to be as a society. And we can't continue to treat our landscape the way that we have. And so protection of wetlands and streams are our biggest way that we can help reduce flooding. So we're working currently on a project in Letcher County where we're talking about buyouts from flooding. They bought out 250 to 300 properties along the streams that had flooded. And we all know as Kentuckians that there's been a lot of flooding issues along our small streams over in eastern Kentucky. And when they buy those properties out, that gives people ability to get out of that floodplain that they may be kind of stuck in. And that also gives us a chance to use those properties to hold water, right? And to use for recreation. And the more we can use it for recreation, the more people will pay attention to our water, right? So all of these things are very beneficial. So we're looking at 300 different properties, and some of them are small and some of them are a little bigger, but everywhere you can hold some water, you can create a wetland, you can plant trees that help slow water down, help filter water, help hold the soil in place when it does flood, so that that soil doesn't come in and cause other flooding downstream, the better off that we're going to be. And so to do that here locally in Frankfort is wonderful, and to be able to do it throughout the Kentucky River system and every river system in Kentucky is a really good thing. So there's a law in place, and I don't know if a lot of people know this, that Kentucky's Division of Water, that Sean talked about here, you cannot make a law more restrictive on protecting water than the federal law. And there are almost every state around us, and a lot of states protect their waterways way more than the federal law, because regionally and locally we have different issues, and the federal law just is not protective enough. So I want to encourage everyone to think about that, and think about how we can talk more about protecting waterways, because the more we protect them, the more we can restore them, and the more that we can reduce flooding here in Frankfort and throughout the watershed. So I guess I'll stop there for now and pass it along, and that's probably it. Like I said, I can talk about this all day.
So at the Division of Water, my group does, I have the state NFIP coordinator that works for me. He works with all the local communities to help them understand and help them comply with the NFIP requirements. We also do floodplain permitting. We have a dam safety section that looks at the safety of current dams and then regulates the construction on dams. And then also the water quality certification section, that if you have to get a federal permit for something that you're doing in a waterway, you also have to get a water quality certification, which is designed to be the place where you would have a more stringent requirement than a federal permit. But we do have some limitations there with the statute. And then also we have the Division of Water has a cooperating technical partnership with FEMA, where FEMA funds us to do the floodplain mapping for the state, to produce and update flood maps. And then if you want to do a flood map change, we now also do the flood map revisions for FEMA, certain types of the flood map revisions.
So within Kentucky Emergency Management, we run the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program. I oversee that. And within Hazard Mitigation Assistance, we have multiple programs that in previous years have been funded. My prior time with KYM, we've always had funding up until this last year. And of course, as we all know, there's kind of a pause, and we're hoping that will go at some point so that we can look at our programs. We have a program called BRIC. I think that one, folks have heard about that. Frankfort has participated in that in the past, and we hope to continue that in the future. We have, and within BRIC, we look at public infrastructure and nature-based solutions for communities. Then you have our flood mitigation assistance program. That program is where a lot of your buyouts or acquisitions will come from, and the whole point of that program is to reduce or eliminate those NFIP that Sean was talking about, those claims. And so there's help there with homeowners, whether it's a buyout or elevating a home. And then we also have our Hazard Mitigation Grant Program that has actually purchased, they were mentioning all those buyouts in Letcher County and other places. In the 22 flood, we were able to get funding to do quite a few buyouts. And unfortunately, last spring, we were not given hazard mitigation grant program for the April flooding. We have appealed it, and we're still hopeful that maybe one day we will get those funding so we can do something. But so we do have 3 programs that do mitigation activities that can help with buyouts, help with restoration of stream banks and things of that nature. But at this time, our funding, unfortunately, as previously was mentioned, is kind of on hold or paused, and we just hope that, again, it will come back one day.
So the way that I fit into all this is Jenny Jo's my boss, and so even though I work at UK for the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, which operates underneath the Martin School of Public Policy and Administration, some of you may be familiar with that. A lot of your local officials or grant managers and some private sector people also have worked there and have gone to school there for Martin School. Within our office, we are contracted to help manage the FEMA Hazard Mitigation Assistance grants for Kentucky Emergency Management. So the way that works is we have the state divided up into areas, and for the non-disaster programs, which is FMA and BRIC, I pretty much will work the entire state for the most part. But for the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program grants, which become available after a disaster is declared, I work, this area is one of my areas that I work. So I have had a privilege of being able to work with Franklin County and the City of Frankfort some over the years with some grants that they've had previously, but also with some applications for funding that is pending right now. One of the projects, the Riverbank Stabilization Project, will be, when it is funded, then I will work with the City of Frankfort to help manage that, which I will just help them stay within compliance of the FEMA grant guidelines and what have you, and help them with their quarterly reports and process their reimbursements and that kind of thing. So I'm just sort of a paper pusher in the middle. But my ultimate goal is to help local communities become more resilient. And so I try to help them find funding. And even if I hear of funding from a different program, having worked with some of these different local communities over the years, I'll reach out and I'll let them know, hey, I heard, that the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation is looking for, to do projects in this area. So I'll send them an email and let them know. So my overarching goal is to just help the local communities. And I'm kind of a liaison, if you will, between them, the local communities, and some of the nonprofit agencies, state agencies, in between them and FEMA, the federal source of funding for the hazard mitigation grants. So that's my role. Sometimes it's very frustrating, especially when things are put on hold and when we have so many projects pending and waiting for funding to come. But we just, that's another part of what I have to do is I have to be patient, and I try to help my local people be patient also, because these things do take time when you're looking for federal grants. You can apply for money, and it can be many years before you ever actually can begin work on your project. So, so right now we're just holding down the fort, so to speak, and whenever things get rolling again, we're ready to roll. But that's my job as it connects to all these other groups and the work in the community here. Also, I mentioned that I'm Executive Director and Webmaster part-time for the Kentucky Association of Mitigation Managers, or CAM, and I just wanted to throw that out there because that is another really strong link and collaboration that we have with many partners across the state and the region. The CAM brings together hazard mitigation professionals from a lot of different disciplines. They might be surveyors or engineers, or they might be local officials or emergency management directors or staff. So we have a really good group of about 300 or so people from across the Commonwealth that we come together for regional trainings in the spring and then in the fall for our annual conference. And so it's a really good forum, a good network for folks who are working for hazard mitigation and to build more resilient communities. And a lot of people don't know that this work goes on every day. we make plans. There are hazard mitigation plans for every jurisdiction in the Commonwealth. And there are people out there putting those things together, coming together, learning and sharing the latest technology and data and information on hazard mitigation. So there's a really good network of people out there that are working for Frankfort, but also for the entire Commonwealth. And so, like I mentioned, there's several people here on the panel that are part of CAM. And so it's a nonprofit, statewide professional organization, basically. So that's just kind of some of the things that I do to try to bring these things together for people and communities.
Thanks. Well, good evening, folks. I'm Brandon Brummett. I work for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Louisville District. And so, how much time we got? 5 to 7 minutes. So, yeah, they saved the windiest guy for last, I think, here. Yeah. But we do a lot within the Corps of Engineers. Flood risk management, ecosystem restoration. We've got under the new leadership that we've got in DC, they've got 7 bands of emphasis for us. Number one's protecting human life and safety, then protecting infrastructure that's economically or strategically significant to the nation, managing efficient navigation and minimizing disruptions to the supply chain, protection of human property, restoration of nationally significant aquatic ecosystems, protecting state-level infrastructure, and protecting municipal infrastructure. So for us to do anything, we have to have both an authorization from Congress, and then we have to have funding that's then appropriated for what they've authorized us to do. So basically, we have to get permission from Congress to do anything, and then they have to give us the money to do what they've given us permission to do. So the general process for having a project of any type to start with the Corps of Engineers, the first step is somebody requests assistance from us. Then we go into a study process to determine if there's a federal interest. We do a feasibility study that looks at a bunch of different options to try and figure out, what's the best way to manage this, and we'll say flood risk management. What's the best way to manage flood risk here? What are the best options? Making sure they're in compliance with all of the laws that we have to follow, looking at the benefit to cost ratio, all of that stuff. Once we do that, then at the end of that report, then Congress authorizes us to construct what we've studied, and then we move into design and construction. And then at the end of that process, typically we turn that project over to a local entity to operate and maintain. So here in Frankfort, we've built 2 projects over the years. The North Frankfort Flood Protection Project started in 1968 and finished around 1970. That was, and keep in mind these were the dollars back at that time, it was about a $3 million project. And then the South Frankfort section was started in 1993 and completed in about late 1996. We turned that over to the city of Frankfort. Again, a whole lot newer projects, so cost escalation, and so that one was roughly about $11.5 million project. So we send inspectors out regularly, about every 5 years, to kind of take a look at what's going on with those flood protection systems. And so far they've, for the most part, worked. We got a little nervous in April because I think the flood protection system, the lowest point is at elevation 511.7. I think I was looking on the National Levee database this morning to make sure I had that right. But and I think the flood got up to almost 510 in elevation. So that's higher than what we had anticipated, but it was still below the level of protection that we were provided. So with that, we've got an emergency management mission where we can help folks do flood fighting. And so we had, I think, a sandbag machine out here in April, and there were about 10,000 sandbags that I think were supplied, and then the city had filled some of their own to kind of sandbag some of those areas and low-lying arears. But for the most part, the flood protection system worked as it designed. And so we were glad to see that. I know one of our guys that comes out and helps with that flood fight mission is a good friend of mine, and he kind of likes to joke around a lot. And he was talking to one of the guys in the emergency management office, and he's like, "Well, as long as you stay at this level, you're probably not going to have any problems. But if you get up to here, you might have problems." And he said, "I wish I hadn't have said that because they got up to there." But anyway, he said, you know, he always jokes around a lot. And he said, I felt bad for joking around, but that, you know, that's kind of the way things go sometimes. But one of the other things that we do is we work with several of the folks here at this table through a group called the Silver Jackets program. Alex Van Pelt with the Division of Water is kind of our state lead for that. But the goal behind that is to get together a group of federal, state, and some local agencies and some nonprofits like CAM to routinely, on a regular basis, and we meet roughly quarterly. Sometimes here in Frankfort, sometimes we'll do it in Louisville, and talk about what each agency's doing and try to partner up on activities. And so Jenny Jo and I were talking on the way in here. I think this happened right before she came into the State Hazard Mitigation Officer position. But the last time I was actually in I think even in this room maybe, was back around 2011, 2012, and we had worked with the U.S. Geological Survey and the National Weather Service to produce a set of flood inundation maps for the city of Frankfort. And if you Google USGS FIM, it'll take you to that map. There's a little slider bar. You can slide it up to the level, the gauge level that the National Weather Service is predicting, and it'll kind of show you what areas in town might flood. And so I was looking at that this morning and reading back some news articles just to see, okay, how close were we on that? And I know this building, it was flooded, if I'm not mistaken, on the lower levels in last year in April. So I was trying to read through the news coverage, and it looked like our model that we did was, you know, fairly accurate. I mean, nothing's 100% accurate, but looking at it, it was like, okay, there were you know, the lower levels got flooded, and that's kind of what those models showed. So we're always happy to answer any questions folks have and help out any way with that we can.
Okay, we're doing pretty well on time. I thank you all for brevity, but I'll give you a chance now, having the panel heard the rest of the panel. If any one of you would like to redress something or add any more information based on what you've heard the others say, please take this opportunity to do so. No? Okay. You know, when I was putting this group together towards the end, it took a while. Towards the end, I got the kind of impression that they all knew each other. And I think that's basically it. Okay, with that, if the panel has nothing else to add, we will open we will open it for questions to the citizens of Frankfort. First hand raised, Mr. Rosen.
First, I'd just like to make a statement, and then I'll have a question. On the planting of trees along the streams and rivers, I think that's really important, but we also need to protect those trees from invasive species. We've lost a lot of trees because of invasive, and I hope that's part of your plan. But my question goes back to
Case Davis.
I really like what you're talking about, is to do an analysis of the entire Kentucky River drainage area. And I think I look at it in terms of we need to think of ourselves as beavers, where we create all these little micro dams. Now, I assume that's kind of a simplified version of what you do. So 2 questions. As you come up with I'm going to switch mics. Sorry about that. Okay, thanks, Jeff. So when you come up, so you'll come up with plans to fix these problems along with Kentucky River Authority. But number 1, what is constraining you? Is it money? Do you need to get permission from the property owners? You know, if you've got a good plan, how do you get it implemented, and what's preventing you from implementing it?
I can. Well, and I have to say, I can talk pretty loud too. a lot of the work that we're doing is predicated on what the Corps of Engineers is doing and what the state's doing. They're doing a lot of the work along, like the North Fork of the Kentucky River, doing a lot of modeling and looking at some of the flood dangers. When we do projects on streams and when we look at these buyout properties or anywhere really, all of the things you mentioned are problems, right? It's how, land ownership is a big deal, right? So when we do a buyout property, we're doing a small project on, let's say on the North Fork of the Kentucky River, and they bought out a couple of houses and we've torn them down. Well, we can do a project along that, little area, maybe stabilize the stream bank. And some of this is coming from federal grant dollars, right? And that's what we're all talking about for grants.
I'm thinking more farther away from the areas which are maybe dry most of the year, but then when there's a flood, it just all runs off.
Sure.
Can we incentivize property owners to do something?
We sure can. We sure can. And there are a lot of the federal, as we're talking about grant writers and things, getting these federal dollars are what really helps, and state revolving fund. There are grant programs in place to do that kind of stuff. But it takes time, and it takes, a good plan. And as engineers, when we do that, we say, hey, here's 100 acres and it's got 3 streams on it. And I think you're kind of talking like maybe these are intermittent streams or ephemeral streams. And how do we slow the water down there? And a lot of them, all over the state, are highly incised and eroding because of a lot of the state has been logged over the past 150 years. Sometimes clear cut and burned was happened a lot in the 1800s and early 1900s, and that cut a lot of the streams down to bedrock and caused a lot of erosion. And so the water run, and plus people moved their streams over to the side of the mountain valley so they could have their house and a garden and some area for cows and things like that. That's how we settled the eastern Kentucky hills for sure. And so all of that was like, hey, let's get the water off of this property as fast as we can so that we can use it for agriculture, we can use it for other things. And so a lot of our projects that are in the headwaters are strictly that. And we take a property and we restore the streams by kind of filling those streams back in and rebuilding them with boulders and natural materials and get rid of the invasive species. That's a big part of our project work, actually, and we spend a ton of time and effort getting rid of invasives. So there's a whole lot. Our mitigation, when we're talking about compensatory mitigation, it's kind of a separate funding mechanism than when we're talking about flood hazard mitigation. And that's just the way that it's set up, right? And so with flood hazard mitigation, we're working under federal dollars. And I think there'll be a lot of state dollars. Like, people are really realizing for every dollar you spend, you're getting $10 to $15 of benefit back from spending that money, because it's reducing flooding, you're getting people property and things protected and out of the floodplains. So in property damage alone, like, you're seeing a huge return on this money. So I think, your question is very good, and it's very complicated in a lot of ways. Somebody told me that, hey, you're not doing rocket science. I'm like, yeah, no, it's way more complicated than that, because not only do you have hydraulics and, soil science and ecology and biology and all the things that go into the ecosystem that our waterways are the basis of. You have to factor all of those things in, as well as the people and the transportation and everything else. So it is a difficult situation, but again, there's a whole lot more focus on these nature-based solutions now, because it's a really good way to do it. Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Sorry. Really quick, I remember who you are now. You do the invasive species removal at the wetland areas in Frankfort? No? Okay, never mind. You look very much like the person that does, and you talked about invasive species, so. It is true, we need to make sure that we're considering invasive species. In general, they don't have as deep of roots as our native species, and so those being on the stream banks are an issue. Another thing that jogged my memory of is that we do need to be thinking about native species when we're planting. Planting things that are already in the area, and you can have a professional come and look at the area around you and give you some guidance on what that could be that you would plant. And then also funding-wise, that NRCS, anybody can get a farm number, which is what gives you access to that, the money to do projects on your own land, and it's a cost share situation. But it's a pretty good cost share for NRCS currently. So if you're interested in that, you can talk to me after this. But everybody thinks they have to have 10 acres. I have a 4-acre farm. I have a farm number. But you don't even have to have an actual farm to get a farm number. You don't have to have critters on your property. But you can get access to that money to help do some of this tree planting and some of these different things that can help with flooding. Okay?
This gentleman?
Hello? Yeah, okay, first I'd like to thank everybody for having this meeting. I would like to appreciate the people that put it together and also our panel of experts. I think it's a very important discussion for our community. As we're here to talk about mitigation of flood in Frankfort, my question is, and I don't know if anybody knows the answer to this, but what's the volume of water that occurred from April approximately 4 to April 11 that went over, say, Lock 4 during the flood event? Can we calculate that? I've estimated it myself, but, you know, I'm a lay person. And I just wondered if anybody's looked at what the volume of water is so that it might be possible to come up with solutions to displace that amount of water, or have it soaked into soil, or, you know, other type. There's lots of mitigation scenarios. So I don't want to limit it to those or get into those specifically, but what's the volume of water we're looking at?
So I did some rough calculations a couple days ago, and it's the watershed here in Frankfort is about 5,000 square miles. And so if you have an inch of rain on that 5,000 square miles, you're going to generate about 170,000 acre feet of runoff. So I don't have any idea during that how much water came down during that time frame, but you're talking about 170,000 acres a foot deep of water with a 1-inch rainfall. So the volume is incredible that you're having to deal with because of the size of the watershed. And unfortunately, the Kentucky River has bluffs. There's not a lot of place to redirect that water. And that's why the folks that talked about doing work in the headwaters and slowing that water down in the headwaters, that's where you're going to get the most benefit. You know, there's just no place close to the Kentucky River to put that water.
Well, I came up with a number of about 200 billion gallons of water for the flood event.
Yeah,
now that is the volume of water going across Lock 4 less the normal level of water going across Lock 4. And that's how I got that. It could be as high as 400 billion. But,
yeah, I mean, it's an astronomical number because
it's approximately the amount of water in Lake Harrington, or double the amount of water in Lake Harrington, depending, because, you know, again, I'm not a river guy.
Yeah.
It sounds like you got it right, though.
Any other questions? Richard?
I don't have that.
What's you next?
If cost and coordination are considerations here, I'm curious to know whether there is a mechanism in the state, say the agency or the Department of Forestry, to provide trees at a minimal cost or even gratis to landowners, and perhaps using either volunteers or perhaps even getting Judge Mueller involved with inmates or perhaps prisoners, actually, who may plant those trees.
So I'm not sure if it's nature preserves or forestry, but they have tree programs every year where you can get trees.
Yeah.
I don't know the number of trees that you can get, but there are programs like that. I don't do that, so I don't know what they are. But you know, you can get trees through the, I think through the Arbor Day Foundation also. So there, I imagine if you were to search on free trees, you'd probably be able to find some sources. You got it.
Yeah, sorry, this is my wheelhouse because this is what. Sorry. Okay, there's a couple programs. Most conservation districts have free tree days. So you can go, I'm sure that yours does. Every single conservation district across the Commonwealth does this. I don't remember when it is in the spring. It's soon. Look at the Conservation District's Facebook pages because that's usually where they put it out on. So that's at least a couple free trees. It's not a lot. The State Forestry Department grows trees and they're really reasonable. They're what they go for. The problem is you do have to order them by February. Sometimes even by November to get the ones you want. So you have to be in there in the fall looking to see what trees you would like to plant, but they are very reasonably priced. And then the Arbor Day Foundation actually has, and this is for mostly you all, but you can petition them for disaster relief tree plantings. So if you have a flooding event, you can contact the Arbor Day Foundation and they will donate a good chunk of trees to be replaced because when flooding happens, a lot of trees go down and they know that. So that's one of their missions. So those are three sort of places I know you can get trees. Also, the Native Plant Society has an entire list of local nurseries, and and they have links to every single one, and so you can see what's available at each native plant nursery in Kentucky. So that's the Kentucky Native Plant Society. Okay.
Ask her a question. I forgot.
So what type of trees are you talking about putting like on our riverbank out here? I mean, the old saying is you plant trees for your grandkids. Well, that's not a whole lot of relief for the immediate processes we have. The most stable banks we have around here are covered in riprap, like right across the river over here by the Secondary School and along our flood wall. And we're blessed with having a major quarry. Is that figure into this in any way? Because I mean, planting trees, I've been here all my life, and the banks that have subsided, once the water comes up, fills it, and then when it rains, it causes slippage. And they got trees on them. They got mature trees on them. So that doesn't seem like the ultimate problem. And then it seems like, just from my experience, and the best way to prevent a lot of water coming to us is to protect the watershed. And that's in direct contradiction to growth and development. And growth and development always wins. So.
You have a lot of good points there. With the scale and size of the Kentucky River, a lot of that erosion does have to be dealt with engineering. and rock. That is a very good point you're making there. The more rock you put down on a river, the more you're going, and the engineers here might be able to answer a little better than me, absolutely would be better at this than me, but the more rock you put there, the water hits that rock and then shoots across to the other side of the stream generally, or the river. That there is unless it is engineered really, really well. And so that is why we're all talking about nature-based solutions, because trees have a lot of roots, have a lot of things that deflect. It's not one big hard surface that the water's hitting and then shooting off to another surface to cause issues on that other surface. So that's why we're talking so much about trees. But you're right, trees are a long game, okay? And there are some trees that do things better and grow faster and quicker. Some of those are willows. Willows are really, really fast. They have really fast roots systems. They spread really fast. They clone themselves under the ground. So you have 2 different types of reproduction with willows, and they have this super awesome rooting hormone that makes them grow a bajillion roots. And so they're one of the quickest trees to put into a really intense area and actually have some quick growth that stops some of that, okay? But in some areas where there's a lot of this, a lot of velocity coming in, you have to worry about putting in other things, like there's tree revetments, which is where you put in different trees, like eastern red cedar is one of the main ones that they use, but you put those in alongside, parallel to the bank, so there's something for the water to hit. So it's not continually cutting out your bank. So there's a lot of options that are nature-based versus the rock. It just requires, those types of things will require engineering a little bit more and a lot of permitting. And that's, unfortunately, this river is a very large river with a lot of velocity, and it does require a lot more thinking on how to deal with those issues. And if anybody else wants to address that. Okay.
Yeah, I got a question in the back, but she's going to be, okay, she's had her hand up forever.
Hi, my name is Sarah. I'm a homeowner here in South Frankfort. My home is in the historic district, and it's in the 500-year floodplain. I had the great fortune of closing on my home a month before the flood. Again, my home is in the 500-year floodplain, not the 100-year. I'm just going to give you a brief history so you know where I'm coming at with these questions, that they're not from a critical place, but from a place of recent experience. My home started flooding internally through a drain in my basement 12 hours before water was in my street. So this is where the flood is still in the 100-year flood zone. My home started flooding internally without warning. 12 hours later, my street went underwater. We had no evacuation notice, no warning to expect that this was happening. So it was a pretty shocking, surprising situation. I have 3 quick questions. I'm going to try to keep this brief. 2 are for the Department of Water. The gentleman in the blue shirt, you mentioned dam safety, and one of the questions that came out from several of our community members, because our street went underwater with no warning in the dead of the night, do we have dam safety warning system if there was to be a failure at one of the dams? Is there an emergency notification? If this happened in the dead of the night, would we have some indication that this was coming and have a chance to evacuate?
So, because you're back there, I'll talk loud. There is something called Dam Watch that you can subscribe to that will give you alerts, and our State Dam Safety Officer has subscribed to all those alerts. And what Dam Watch does, and I'm not sure, you'd have to just do a web search on it. What that does is that gives you information. I think you can set like points along the dam based on the elevation of the dam, to where if the water gets up to this high, you'll get an alert. If it gets up to this high, you'll get an alert. But that's not all structures are on that. But that's really pretty much it.
Okay. I mean, I think our community would definitely advocate for some way for that system to tie in locally, because if there were a catastrophic failure, I don't think we'd have a lot of time necessarily for us to evacuate. So I'd definitely like to advocate for that for your department. My other question is there another employee from the Department of Water? Okay. Is either of your office responsible for, I believe it goes through the Department of Water, but managing the operator permit for the city of Frankfort for their CSO sewer system? Is that either of you two? Okay. One more question. This question is for the mayor. I've been in touch with your office for several months advocating for a survey to go out to survivors of the flood to help identify some of the communication and evacuation issues that came up, and also to request that the city audits their recent disaster response, because a whole street going underwater with no notice is, I'm sure we can all agree, not an ideal situation. The city, though, hasn't acknowledged any significant lapses in city services during that time. And I wondered, 11 months after the flood, if you could speak to some of those and what the city's doing to address those issues.
Yes, and this is something we did discuss in a city commission meeting, and I believe I emailed you and invited you to attend, Sarah, to come talk about it in front of the entire commission. And our city manager and staff are putting together a survey to send out. We have a system called Frankly Speaking. I'll have to ask where that is. It is at the staff level. I'm in support of doing something like that. We've asked about an audit. We're not sure how you audit it's not like you're auditing financial books here in terms of, we have to follow the protocols that are in place. We rely heavily on the Kentucky Emergency Management Partners. Before this flood even crested in April, we had incident response team people here on the ground. We had members of FEMA here on the ground working with us, and these are people who work on disasters throughout the country, throughout the state. They had just come from Eastern Kentucky. And we had the experts in the room, and we were at the EOC, the Emergency Operations Center, quite a bit for 2 weeks, but the judge and I declared an emergency on this Friday afternoon. We started doing our first videos together on Saturday. And this was before the flood crested on Monday morning. So we were getting the word out. And I know on Sunday, we were going door to door in South Frankfort all the way up to Todd Street, because we were looking at those flood inundation maps, which came in they were very useful, the USGS flood inundation maps. And we were following along. Anytime there was a change in the projected water forecast, the crest level, we were modeling this and saying, how does this affect different areas? We were thinking about, what if this goes to 52 feet? We took it to the max, and that's why we wanted to make sure that everybody knew that this was something that we didn't force people to leave, at least we shouldn't have, but we strongly recommended that people get out of their homes, because there was a chance that we were going to be coming back and picking you up in a kayak or a boat. And we did have to rescue quite a few people. We had to rescue, I don't know how many pets, but I could think of one example. Just on Saturday night, and this was before it flooded on Paul Sawyer and Hermitage, that I looked at the map and saw that it was going to go to 47 feet, which was quite a big jump, and I saw that that was going to affect the public housing on Walter Todd. So I called the executive director and said, this is going to hit you now. So I think we were giving as much warning as we could. Of course, the city and the county made mistakes along the way that if we could go back, if we knowing what we know now, we could go back and do it perfectly, we would. But at the time, we were operating under the best information that we had, and and thankfully, during that event, the river flooding event, we were able to protect lives, and most of the public property and the property that was destroyed, we were able to come through and remove the debris as quickly as we could, while also servicing the people that were not affected by the flood. And you have to remember that as difficult it was, because I live in I live downtown, and we were affected downtown South Frankfort tremendously. But there were a lot of people on the east and west sides of town that were not affected at all, and probably didn't realize much was going on now. But we had to still service those folks as well, and we were able to do both of those things at the same time. So I welcome any review of how we handled the situation, but I'm confident that most people feel like we did a great job, and I'm proud of our emergency management team who are here in the back. I'm proud of the city staff and for all the volunteers that showed up. I mean, it was amazing how quickly you had people coming in from across the country to help us out. Organizations I didn't know existed were here on the ground, and it brought out a lot in our community, and I was proud to be mayor of Frankfort, Kentucky during that time.
Okay, would remind the audience that we are focused on the present and the future, not so much as what happened in the past. We just don't really have time for that. My friend Alex Van Pelt has just joined us after driving furiously from Bowling Green, and even though he is a St. Louis Cardinal fan, it says it's green, it says it's on, okay. I'm going to let him tell you who he is and what he does.
Yeah, thank you. So like Jeff said, guys, my name is Alex Van Pelt. I work with the Division Water. In fact, Sean is my boss. He's my direct report. My role at Division Water is, the official title is NFIP coordinator. Not many people know what NFIP stands for, so I'm more commonly referred to as the state floodplain manager at Division Water. My role is to be the coordinator between federal, state, and local partners. So when FEMA will deploy after a major disaster declaration, for example, one of the things I do is I go in and I help train their staff on how our floodplain management processes work here in Kentucky, what makes us unique from other states. For example, Kentucky is one of 2 states in the country that actually has state-level permitting authority. So we have folks at the Division of Water who can do a lot of the heavy lifting when it comes to looking at engineering, design drawings, modeling, mapping, things like that. So teaching them how things go, but then also coordinating with the local communities, reaching out to the mayors, the judge executives, reaching out to the local floodplain managers, building departments, things like that, telling them where resources are, how to find information, things of that nature. A lot of what I do is I live in the regulatory world, so not so much the responding to the disaster initially, but more looking at the long-term recovery. So I help communities with their local floodplain management processes, whether that's permits, maps, things of that nature, looking at their ordinances. Are there things we can be doing better? Are there higher standards that we could potentially incorporate into our local requirements that might go above and beyond what the state requires? About half of Kentucky, for example, has a higher building code requirement when it comes to developing in the floodplains than we require at the state, which is great. Our statewide requirement is if you build at or above the flood elevation, that's the minimum required, whereas about half the communities in Kentucky say, no, we want you to be 1 foot, 2 foot, 3 feet higher than that to account for bigger than expected floods like we experienced last year, but also looking at future uncertainties, whether that be changes in mapping, changes in community development, things of that nature. So my role is a lot of technical expertise dealing with, again, federal, state, and local partners. So I work very closely with Jenny Jo as the state hazard mitigation officer. She and I typically are the representatives whenever FEMA comes into town or into the state as far as dealing with some of the state organizations. Sorry, I'm late. Thank you, everybody, for waiting.
You had a question?
Okay. Okay, so the Conservation District has our tree giveaway in Franklin County on the 18th of March. So write that down, and I had a list of all the trees they were giving away, but, yeah, well, you know how phones work. So we also have Reforest Frankfort, which I can't find a date for. Do you all?
It's the 18th.
It's the 18th of April, same as our Earth Day.
Oh, it's the 18th of April, same as yeah.
Together Frankfort's Earth Day.
Together Frankfort Earth Day, so.
But where is it? I can't get anybody.
Library and Archives.
Library and Archives. Maybe it should be down by the river.
Where the tree giveaway is?
Reforest
Frankfort, the archives, and it was just decided this week.
Okay, so the Reforest Frankfort, April 18th is at the archives.
Okay.
That's off of the connector, right?
Yeah.
And then the tree giveaway for the Conservation District is the 18th of March, and that will be at the Conservation District. It usually is. I think, Kanan, are you here?
101 Lakeview Court.
101, okay, got it.
What time?
That I don't know.
8 o'clock sharp.
8 o'clock sharp, and they go quick. They go quick.
Okay. Well, I already got you, so I gotta do.
Okay, I'm definitely for tree planting, but I think it's important for us to remember that parallel to these kinds of mitigation efforts, every community is trying to grow their economy. Every community wants to put in new subdivisions, new parking lots, new shopping malls, industrial parks, you name it. That's why in a lot of these places that are being developed, there's resistance to the rules and regulations that do prescribe stormwater management, runoff, detention basins, these kinds of things that do minimize flooding or reduce our risk of flooding. I think it's important for us to remember that our role as a community in Frankfort is just our footprint right here, but we need to be thinking larger in terms of the basin because every community has varying degrees of rules in this respect and how they implement them. So I'm just going to throw that out there and let some of the folks who are more knowledgeable about those rules speak to it and how that helps mitigate flooding.
Thank you. Anyone? No one? This is the
I can speak a little bit to our local regulations, but it like you said, we can't really, I can't do a lot about what another community is doing as far as their growth. But we are, looking to improve our regulations so that our construction has less of an impact on flooding and causing water issues more broadly. So again, we're looking at those riparian buffers, we're looking at updating our floodplain management. Stormwater is always something that we're looking at with new development. So really trying to modernize where we are. But I don't know that I can answer your question about more regional.
I'm gonna hand it to her because you want to answer this? So one thing I will say, in the last court, one of the things we did, we all mostly in this room know Slickaway Branch, and it runs from way out Duncan Road all the ways down through the country club, and there it goes. So the fiscal court added an extra, I believe, 20% restrictions on what they have to do. So if anybody along that entire Slickaway Branch has to build, they have to go above and beyond 20% of what the current regulations are. So I do commend our planning and zoning for looking at areas that are very extreme and trying to address those and be more offensive than defensive. So we're trying.
There is a lot of new initiatives within the Kentucky River Basin to do a lot of green infrastructure. So building is inevitable. But there are a lot of ways, like the stormwater basins that everybody's talking about, those are already regulated. But there are other things that is called green infrastructure, which is basically anything that allows the water to percolate down through that wouldn't normally. That's parking lots. They have these permeable bricks that allow water down through that you can put in instead of a paved parking lot. There's a lot of different options in those ways, and I would say Esther is probably the one to talk about this because CAM has a really good green infrastructure manual on their website.
Well, we do have a pretty good website, so if you want to go to kymitigation.org, there are some resources on there about, just information on different projects that you can implement. Some of them on small levels, like a homeowner could implement, and others then on a larger scale. As far as green infrastructure goes, you've probably heard of a lot of the terminologies. Some buildings implement rooftop gardens to slow the runoff, and even like within the city and parking lots, you might have where your median areas are, and those can be used as swells, kind of bioswells, or just have trees in them, or other engineering outlets and things to help slow the water and move the water in different ways. So there are a lot of different options that you can do, just even as private property owners, or that you can information that you can disseminate through your civic groups and that kind of thing. Every little bit does make a difference.
Just as a personal opinion, this is a societal issue, right? And when we make regulation to reduce protections of our waterways, that usually comes from development. And when developers don't want to have to pay for impacts to waterways, they don't want to have bear the environmental burden of the impacts that they're causing. And we deregulate we've had some good regulations in place in the past, and they have been rescinded, and that goes back and forth occasionally, but it's a tax on everybody that lives downstream, everybody that lives in the state, everybody that lives in the country, and everybody that lives in the world. So it's a the regulatory environment exists to protect people who, all the ordinary citizens of this country. And when we allow developers to reduce protections or not protect us, then we pay the cost.
We all tend to know that the Kentucky River corridor has a lot of erosion that has happened along that. And that eroded soil and sediment goes in the river bottom and then potentially increases the height of the river bottom, bringing it closer to the surface of the water. So has there been a discussion in regard to dredging? I am the magistrate for the 1st District here in Franklin County, and it encompasses the entire corridor. I've got River Valley, Mulholland Beach, Big Eddy, Travis Circle, and all of South Frankfort. And there is a considerable amount of sediment that I can say that has come from my own yard. I live on the Kentucky River. My home was flooded. But this is not about the flood that has just happened. More is getting deposited all the time that increases the displacement of the volume of water. So I have a question about dredging. And I've written the River Authority about this, so I'm hopeful I hear something back. Thank you.
Anybody? Both gentlemen from the Department of Water.
So the Kentucky River has a series of locks on it, and the locks control the water level. So any dredging you do is not going to have any impact on the water level, even though you would think it would. those locks control that water level. So dredging is an effective method to maintain navigation. It is not a flood mitigation option. If you dredge, you end up having to dredge again and again and again. The Corps of Engineers did a study up near Beattyville, and it was going to be...
Yeah, we looked at, Yeah, so we're doing a couple of studies in the Upper Kentucky, one in response to the 2021 floods in Beattyville, Kentucky, and then we're also doing a larger Upper Kentucky basin study there in Eastern Kentucky that we're in the middle of now. So a lot of the local residents and local elected officials in Lee County and Beattyville were convinced dredging is the way to go here. So our hydraulic engineers sat down and calculated out how much sediment they would need to remove for it to make even a dent in the type of flood they had in 2021. And then they looked at the cost. And the cost to dredge just that small section there near Beattyville was over $1 billion with a B. So we have to look at the benefit to cost ratio of doing things, and you know, $1 billion is that's some real money. So that was one of those things. When we saw that number, we knew instantly that that's not going to be a cost-effective solution. And especially like Sean said, it's kind of like that thing, you just have to keep doing it over and over and over again. One thing that we are going to look at, because this is a common thing, and Alex and I have been joking, do you want to handle this? Do you want to handle this? So, you know, with this question, through our Kentucky Silver Jackets program and through the Corps of Engineers Floodplain Management Services program, we actually requested for some funding to do a study, and we're just gonna pick a few streams in Kentucky. We haven't narrowed what those are down yet. But to do kind of an analysis to look at that, just to give us a little bit more facts and figures of, okay, if we were to dredge this, what would the cost look like? What would the flood benefits look like? And how long do we think those flood benefits would be good for? Because right now, it's kind of one of those things, we don't have as many, other than that Beattyville study that we looked at it, we don't have that data in a whole lot of other areas. So that way we can say to folks, hey, we've looked at some streams in Western Kentucky. This is what limited benefit we think you would get, just to kind of arm ourselves so that we can help spread that information that dredging is just not a very effective, flood risk management solution.
Well, and going beyond just the cost of the dredging, there's also not any ecological benefits with the dredging, right? So Brandon was talking about when you dredge, typically what we end up finding is you go back anywhere from 3 to 5 years later and dredge again. What happens whenever you dig a hole is water slows down, and slow water is not energetic, and it can't carry a whole lot of sediment load. So when that water slows down, it drops everything it's holding, which means that hole fills back in rapidly. Typically, you're better off looking at other types of mitigation. You know, when we talk about streams in Kentucky, what we find is anywhere, the stream itself, between the banks of the stream, can hold anywhere from a 1.5 to 2.5 year storm event. We regulate up to the 100-year event, right? So the other 98% of the water is not going within the stream itself. So to dredge out the stream to get any real benefit, you're talking 30 feet, 50 feet, 100 feet of down into the river. And not just here in Frankfort, but you have to go upstream and downstream to tie it in. And so it just is not a long-term benefit. You're better off looking at things like reconnecting wetlands. You're better off looking at green infrastructure, about sloping the banks back to prevent further erosion going into the stream, armoring the stream, whether that's with riprap, whether that's bamboo matting, whether that's using quick-growing grasses, willow stakes. You can actually bury the root balls, the root stumps of trees with the top of the tree essentially poking into the bank and the root ball out, and that is really great about slowing that water down and preventing the erosion along the edge of the bank, especially on curves and things like that. So not only just the cost and how frequently you're going to have to go back and do it, but you're not really seeing the benefit of what you're trying to accomplish. So dredging, outside of what the Army Corps does for navigation, dredging is really not a good solution for most anywhere in Kentucky.
And I want to explain one other thing. So when I was talking about the elevation of the water, you have to understand those locks control what the elevation of the water is. So if you dredge out all that material, what happens? Water level comes up to the top of that lock. You have no storage. It's gone. It's been filled up by water that was already there. Okay.
There's no storage behind
Yeah,
the
there's
lock
yeah.
on the river.
Yeah.
I'm not going to get to everybody. I'm sorry. You didn't have a question? Dawn?
I don't know if this is on topic or not, but
Speak right into it.
I said I don't know if this is on topic or not, but as a former longtime South Frankfort resident, I knew that when the river got to be 33 feet, we had water in our basement. And so you really look at what the crests are predicted to be. And they're always upped. And so I wondered if, one, I have no idea on the science of how you get the predictions of the crest, but is there anything that can be done to make them more accurate? So when a person goes to bed thinking it's going to crest at 31 feet and it gets in your basement at 33, and so you think you're cool, you don't have to do anything, but then the crest is revised to 38 feet, and all of a sudden you've got a real issue. So I didn't know if any of y'all could answer that or not.
So the question you're specifically asking is really geared more towards the Weather Service or towards USGS. They're the ones who kind of maintain the gauge network and provide that data through the Weather Service. What's their new acronym? It used to be AHAPS. National Water Predictive Service. NWIPS, thank you. So when you're asking is what can we do to make those predictions better, I have to say I'm extremely impressed with our National Weather Service partners in what they're able to get out. The issue we typically run into is the issue we run into most things, which is funding. If we had infinite money, we could do infinite things. So one of the things we did as a Silver Jackets product is we actually did a gauge analysis looking across Kentucky and saying, where do we have good representation when it comes to stream gauges? Where are some of the areas that could benefit from a gauge? We looked at some of the community's ability to help fund the long-term maintenance on some of those gauges, because it's not just installing it, but there's a yearly cost to keeping the gauge up and running and things like that. So we have looked at where can we improve our gauge network across Kentucky. We're going to turn around and use that study findings to then propose installation and locations on new gauges. Something I think, though, that would speak to your concern about going to bed with the prediction showing one thing and waking up with it something completely different, is both USGS and the National Weather Service have basically weather alert systems that you can tie to specific gauges. So I actually have one here in Frankfort where anytime the river gauge gets above 40 feet, I get a direct text message as soon as that prediction comes out. There are services out there that we can help get you guys set up with, where you can set what gauges you might be interested in. You can tell at what level of interest. Is it when we get to the activation stage? Is it low risk, moderate risk, high risk, severe risk of flooding? What level are you interested in? Is there certain gauge heights? So you spoke to once you have 33 feet on the gauge, you're going to get water in your basement. You can set the alert at below that or near that so you're alerted ahead of time to give you time to take action and potentially do something in the immediate moment.
Can you share that?
Yes, if there's a sign-in sheet, I'm happy to share that via email later.
Okay, that's good.
Hi, my name's Paula Murphy. I live in the 100-year floodplain, a couple of blocks over that way, and we've been there, my husband and I have been there for 25 years. So this is not our first rodeo, and we've learned a lot living right down in the floodplain. We're the house on the river. And so I lay in bed a lot and think of engineering solutions and, anything that can help the situation, particularly with downtown, the historic area of downtown Frankfort, because this city was located in this spot on the river. It's the largest city on the Kentucky River, and it was located here for navigation reasons. So we have so many historic properties that are affected. And And, so I look at I'm a landscape architect as well. So trees planting solutions and green roofs and all these solutions are fantastic. But they take time, and my husband and I are in our 60s and 70s. We don't have decades for trees to grow up and that sort of thing. So I look at engineering solutions, and I see a couple of engineering solutions that could help downtown Frankfort, and they might be expensive. I don't know. I'm not an engineer. But one of the things I think about is a way to divert water coming downstream on that straight line before it hits the S-curve, and diverting some of the flood water when it gets to a certain level through a system of conduits or tunnels, pipes, under Fort Hill, and letting that water down below Buffalo Trace, letting it rejoin the stream below Buffalo Trace. So that's one thing that's been on my mind for years, and I try to share this idea whenever I have the opportunity. The other idea is to use Crumbo Bottom, if it means excavating a lot of that land. It's called Trumbo Bottom, upstream, excavating more of that land, so there's an area for extra flood water to dissipate through. And then the third thought that just came up when you all were talking about the dams is, I know we need the dams upstream for water resources for communities to get their water supply, but can we look at maybe getting rid of some of the dams because the dam system is not navigable once you get past Lock 3, right? Lock 5. The 4. Oh, well, okay. So, why not remove some of those dams upstream if it would help, and look for areas to dissipate some of this, the extra flood water too.
I have a feeling this might be our last question.
Well, I can be pretty quick. So your first option is just horrendously expensive. I mean, it's you're talking about drilling an engineered hole. It's incredibly expensive to do that work, and the last option is good. Those types of options are good for providing extra storage, right? But they only provide the amount of storage for the volume of material that you've removed, right? So, you're going to have a limited amount of effect because there's not a whole lot of material that you can remove, and then you got to have someplace to put it when you take it out. So that's why in this area there's the work that you would do on a cubic yard for cubic yard basis is probably going to be less effective than what you can do in the upstream, because upstream, if you can slow that water down, then not as much gets here, and you move less material in doing the construction upstream and have a greater effect. Yeah.
Real quick. The other thing to remember too when we're talking about, locking dams are one thing, but some of the, especially Army Corps dams and farther up in the watersheds, they do a lot, not just in the area where the lake and the dam are, but downstream, those lakes are able to capture quite a bit of water and store it temporarily, which doesn't sound like it's a lot, but it does help to knock the peak off of the hydrograph. So if you think about the river gauge over time, it goes up, it goes down. A lot of those Army Corps lakes and things like that upstream in the watershed are able to capture that water so that the peak may only hit 45 feet instead of 48 feet or 43 feet or something like that. So the dams can be beneficial. Your idea for Trumbo Bottom is one that we were kind of talking about when we say green infrastructure. That is the type of idea where we're talking about where it is an area that was previously connected to the river. It is formerly river, stream. So that's the type of area where we would look to implement some type of project. The issue you typically run into, like Sean mentioned, is the cost, the material, what do you do with it, but then also getting property owner buy-in. There are projects that I'm aware of. I wish Brian Storrs could have been here because he can speak a little more when it comes to green infrastructure specifically, but there's a project he's doing in Moorhead right now where they are looking at either 11 or 12 basins that are just green infrastructure kind of along the stream on already city-owned property or property that property owners are willing to donate to the cause, that is causing a significant drop in Triplet Creek through Moorhead. And when I say significant, I mean the modeling is showing upwards of 6 to 12 inches drop off the top. Now, that's to say Triplet Creek is a much smaller creek than the Kentucky River, obviously, but the more storage you're able to create through projects like that, the better it's going to be. If you give floodplains room to function as the overflow valve, which is what they are, typically that's going to put you in a much better spot, especially if you're also not just leaving it as natural functions, but also giving that water somewhere to hang out and essentially, hopefully, not flood property owners such as yourselves.
And that project is one of those upstream projects that will have benefits down here.
Okay. One other thing I do want to mention, and this is talking about mitigation ideas specifically, so if you're not really sure where to start when it comes to mitigation ideas, FEMA has a guide out there that is simply called Mitigation Ideas that talks about 17 different types of natural hazards, and when you get to flooding specifically, there's like 26 or 28 different types of mitigation, all the way ranging down from installing flood vents on your house to potentially prevent damage to your foundation, all the way up to doing big watershed-wide or watershed-wide scale projects or incorporating higher standards and things like that. So I do recommend looking at what is out there, because it's not just the big sweeping watershed-wide projects, but also small things that you can do on your property that'll lessen your risk individually.
Is your question quick? Is it quick? It's got to be quick.
Okay, quick. First, I want to thank Squire Sebastian for bringing up the subject of dredging. And I'd like for you all to tell me what's the state of dredging the Kentucky River in Frankfort now, and what is dredging going to be in the future, in future plans, like, the big plan we have for protecting and encouraging the Kentucky riverbanks in Frankfort. So.
We kind of addressed dredging, didn't we?
Yeah, again, dredging is effective for navigation. So if you want to maintain navigation, dredging is one of the ways you do it. That's why the Corps spends millions of dollars every year on the Mississippi and those Ohio rivers. But it is not a flood mitigation tool.
Okay, for those of you with other questions, I'm sorry, but they're going to throw us out of here, and somebody has to stack all these chairs, and that usually falls on me.
Is there a way that anybody who didn't get their question answered could email Together Frankfort, and maybe the panel would be able to
Sure.
answer in their own time?
Yep, I have all their email addresses, and I can connect you all. Yep, I can connect you all. That always happens on these. Okay, first of all, nothing gets changed unless Frankfort citizens show up. You all showed up tonight. Thank you very much. Give yourselves a big hand. These professionals and community leaders didn't have to do this tonight. They're out here to help you, and I think they deserve a big hand as well. Thank you so much. And with that, I think we are adjourned.